few words she wants to say. Let me click this message off here. My name's Amy Woytovich. I'm the genealogy and local history librarian at the State Library of Pennsylvania. Today, we're going to speak a little bit about immigration records that you can find at the State Library or in a lot of other places. Almost everyone in the United States descended from someone who arrived in the United States from somewhere else and went through an immigration or migration process. Because Pennsylvania was one of the original colonies, and Philadelphia had a port, Pennsylvania saw many, many different immigrants come from many different ethnic groups in other countries throughout its history. You'll find that in the US, immigration tended to come in different waves. When the colony of Pennsylvania was first founded, people came from countries like England, Germany, and Wales. They wanted to escape religious persecution. Then later on, for economic reasons, people arrived from places like Ireland and Scotland. And even later than that, for economic reasons, they arrived from other European countries like Poland or Austria or Russia and Italy. With most Americans' backgrounds being so different, we're all interested in our past, we're all interested in where our families came from, and we're all trying to constantly learn more about our family's past. So where you go to find your records of your ancestors' arrival in Pennsylvania depends largely on the time period that your ancestor arrived. Um, to find this out, you want to find out as many details as you can about your ancestors' life here in the United States before you start searching for your immigration records. The immigration records that you're going to turn up also are going to depend on where your ancestor emigrated from. People who arrived from Britain before the American Revolution, they were British subjects. They were just simply relocating from one area of Britain to another. Since their legal status never changed, they're not going to be included on any naturalization records. And many times they weren't even included on ships' passenger lists. So again, before you begin searching for your immigration records, it's a good idea to go back and examine what you already know about your ancestors' life in the United States. You need to find out about as much information as you can about his life here after he arrived to find the pieces of information that you need to go searching for things like passenger lists and immigration records. Specifically, the three things that you really need to find before you begin: you need to know your ancestor's name. You need to know the original name that he arrived here with or using. And this is important because most likely the name that you're using is not your ancestor's name. Spellings changed over time. A lot of times your ancestor may have gone by a different first name as well. You also need to know his arrival date and also his age at arrival. And if you haven't filled out your family group sheet, you can find the blank charts of family group sheets in genealogical forms at the National Archives. You can also download them from places like Ancestry and Family Search. The National Archives will also have blank census records and things like blank immigration forms on the charts and forms pages. And that may be important to you because when you find these records, a lot of times they're in very bad condition. They're very hard to read. The ink has faded, the handwriting is bad. So you can go to these blank forms and figure out what they were asking for. The age of arrival.
Amy, I'm going to stop you a minute. This is Kathy Hale. I'm the supervisor for public services. Just a reminder that if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and we will do them afterwards. One thing too about having your ancestors in immigration is that some people came as teenagers or maybe young children with other relatives. So when you're looking for these kinds of records, look for similar names or places of origin because they might have come over with other family members, not necessarily parents. Thanks, Amy.
Oh, sure. That also connects to one of the reasons you want to know the age that your ancestor arrived, because when you go searching through passenger lists and naturalization records, you are going to find out that there were many, many people who were arriving who had the same name as your ancestor, and they arrived at the same time. So this will help you eliminate the people who you're not related to. If you find early records too, it also gives you a hint of how your ancestor was spelling his name when he first arrived. So where to find this information? You can find this information in records like census records, vital records, newspapers, and family and county histories. The best place to start, though, is by doing interviews with other family members, especially your older family members. They will probably have immigration stories that were passed along over time and handed down to you, and they can fill in a lot of missing information that way. The thing to remember with family member interviews, what they may be telling you may not be correct. They may have mistaken their dates, or sometimes they were told a family story that was never correct to begin with, but they don't know that. So anything that they tell you, you need to verify somewhere else. The best place to start is the US Census. You can find census records and Ancestry. You can also find them on Heritage Quest. These are both subscription databases that the state library does subscribe to, and state employees can access them remotely. At the moment, Ancestry can be accessed until June 30th. After June 30th, you'll still be able to get to the census records through Heritage Quest. You just need to go to our electronic databases page and go through those links there. If you try to Google Ancestry, you will only be able to get into the paid subscription Ancestry. You won't be able to use the free Ancestry Library Edition. The National Archives also has links or information to census information on its site. It also has a website called Clues in Census Records. This will give you all of the genealogical clues that you can find in the census, not just for immigration, but other subjects for genealogy as well. If you need to know what questions are asked because you can't read the census, the US Census Bureau has an index of census questions. They list every question that was asked on every census, and the National Archives also has the blank census forms on its site.
So each census asked different questions.
Mhm.
So some of them asked if your relatives could read or write, or the country of origin, and that will give you some clues.
There were actually a lot of immigration related questions going back to 1820. In 1820, only heads of households were listed by name, but there is a column for the number of foreigners not naturalized on the 1820 census. So if you're able to locate your ancestor on the 1820 census, or at least determine which household he was living in, you can use the information in that column to narrow down the date that he may have been naturalized to help narrow your search for his naturalization records. In 1850, the census takers started asking for the place of birth. In 1880, they added the parent's place of birth as well as the person who's being listed on the census. The most immigration and naturalization questions are going to be asked in the early 1900s. In 1900, they asked for the place of birth for the person of the parents, the year of the person's immigration to the United States. They asked how many years he lived in the United States and whether or not he was naturalized. In 1910, the questions were pretty similar, but in 1920, they asked more detailed questions. In addition to the place of birth and the parent's place of birth, they asked the year of immigration for the person. They also asked whether he was naturalized or an alien. If he was naturalized, they asked for the year that he was naturalized. And they also asked for the mother tongue of the person and the mother tongue of his parents as well. And in 1930, they included the place of birth information, the language he spoke to the US before coming to the US, the year of his naturalization, and whether he was naturalized or an alien. In 1940, the census was taken as we were recovering from the Great Depression. So the questions are going to be more economic focused. They asked more about employment and housing factors, and they were more interested in the economic recovery of the United States as opposed to immigration. So in 1940, the only information you'll be able to find is the person's place of birth and whether or not he was a citizen. And it's a good idea to check out all of the censuses that you can find your ancestor listed on, because you're going to find that the answers varied over the year. The census answers aren't always 100% accurate. The person who was answering the census takers questions might have been answering for someone else in the household, and he was just guessing at the answers. Sometimes people got their dates mixed up, especially if they were trying to remember events that happened a long time before. And sometimes the census taker simply had trouble understanding what the person was saying. So he just wrote down his best guess at what they were answering.
Okay, also in the 1940 census, the question was asked of where were you living in 1935? Because
yes.
they wanted to track people who had migrated from, say, the Ozarks or other places in the East to other places in the West?
These are just the 3 censuses that my grandfather was listed on, to use as an example. A discrepancy on them. You can see about whether he was naturalized or not. In 1910 and 1920, he said that he was naturalized. In 1930, whoever answered the census in 1920, he listed his native language as Polish. In 1930, they said that his native language for him and his parents was both Ukrainian.
The other thing you're going to see is you also have to know your European history. So someone who was born in Austria may have been born in the Hungary. They might put their place of origin as Hungary and Austria, so that there are different things that you need to go through as far as what Europe looked like at the time that you're searching for. Nicole, it seems like we lost Amy.
Yeah. If you want to go ahead and put the slides back up.
Okay, I don't know that I have the slides. Hold on.
Sorry, everybody, for the technical issues. There are a few questions in the chat if you do want to maybe go through and answer those. All right, Kathy, I'm going to read some of the questions to you.
Okay.
Will we get a copy of these slides later?
The answer is yes. We will do copies of the slides it's going to be a couple of days before Nicole can get them up. So the answer is yes, you will be able to get those.
And it looks like we have Amy back. Let me see.
I think you still don't have her back. Oh, there she is.
Okay.
Okay, Amy.
Trying to find my way back to the spreadsheet here.
Okay, there you go.
All right.
Okay. I'm sorry
Thanks,
about
everyone.
that. My
Thanks,
internet suddenly died.
everyone, for dealing with the blip.
So I think I was talking about my grandfather's, the censuses that he was on, and like his answers are different on for his native language. It's either Polish or Ukrainian, but if you compare it to the family histories that I was given from other family members in interviews, he was from a section of the Carpathian Mountains that in Austria that was one time part of Poland, and it's near the Ukrainian border, and over time the border sort of shifted. So that kind of demonstrates how you're going to have to take the information you find on these records and compare it to the other information you find elsewhere to make sure you have the correct 3 facts that you need to search for immigration records.
Just like you do in the United States, that when you're looking for certain county information, those counties have changed over time. And as I said before, the borders of various European, Asian, or African nations have changed quite a bit, or the names have changed quite a bit over time.
The next place you can check for your 3 facts for immigration are in vital records. Vital records are going to be things like birth certificates, death certificates, and marriage licenses. The information that was collected changed over time, so you can't be sure what information you're going to find on them. It's going to vary. Again, the information is not going to be 100% accurate because the person who is providing the information may not have known the correct answer and just simply guessed at whatever the answers were for the questions. Birth certificates obviously are going to have the name of the person's parents on it. They do sometimes list the place of birth for the parents as well as for the child. It also, if you can find early birth certificates, it can give you another clue about how your ancestor was spelling his last name. Before I lost internet, did I mention the names on the census that it showed you the different variations of the names? I don't think I did.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, I did? Okay, because like my grandfather's first 4 children, on their birth certificates, their names are all spelled differently. So it can give you a clue about how he was spelling his name when he was filling out the information for the passenger list. Death certificates.
You also have to remember that spelling was not homogenized until the mid 1900s. So people spelled the names the way that they phonetically thought they should be spelled.
Death certificates, they have quite a bit of genealogical information on them. They have the name of the person and his parents. They have the person's birth date on it. They also include the birthplace of the person's parents as well. The thing to remember with death certificates is that they are usually created many years after the person died. So the person who's filling out this information, sometimes the surviving family member doesn't know when the person arrived, where the person's parents were born or the name of the person's parents. So they either guess or they leave it blank. Sometimes these death certificate applications are even filled out by people who weren't even related to the person. They were simply somebody who was in their lives at the time of death. So a lot of times you're not going to get a lot of information on it. It really depends on who was filling out the certificate. The certificate on the left here is it's my grandfather's death certificate, and it was actually filled out by my grandmother. But you can see that she left almost all of the genealogy information about his parents and where they were born blank. Marriage certificates also, depending on which county the marriage occurred in and what questions they were asking at the time, they can also include the names of the parents and where the person or their parents were born. To find these things, you're going to have to go for birth certificates and death certificates. The Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission does have some. They also have them in Ancestry and Family Search. The Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission also has a database for birth and death certificates called Ancestry Pennsylvania. Anyone from Pennsylvania can use it. You have to put in your zip code to verify that you do live in Pennsylvania. But to use the Ancestry Pennsylvania database, it is free, but you have to go through the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission's link on their website. In Pennsylvania, birth certificates and death certificates aren't released until a certain period of time has passed. And for death certificates, it's 50 years. And with birth certificates, it's 105 years. So in those databases, you're only going to find birth certificates from 1906 to 1915 and death certificates from 1906 to 1970. If you want something that's more recent, you have to go to the Division of Vital Records. The Division of Vital Records at the Pennsylvania Department of Health will only release that information to you if you are a direct relative, let's say a child or a parent or a grandparent. If you're looking for an older birth certificate before 1906, those would be kept in the county. They're probably not going to have much genealogical information on them because they simply didn't record much information at that time. If you want to try your family's marriage certificates to see what information is on them, marriage records in Pennsylvania are always kept at the county courthouse where the marriage occurred. So you can find a list of county courthouses at our website, or you can also go to the Pennsylvania Unified Judicial Systems website, and they have a list of county courthouses with contact information. Newspapers are another good place to look for immigration information, the 3 facts that you'll need to search for passenger lists and naturalization records. Newspapers will have things like obituaries, marriage announcements, and retirement announcements in them. The very early newspapers also had lists of ship's arrivals in them, and they sometimes published passenger lists in the ship's arrival sections in the newspapers. And things like obituaries, you can find birth and death dates, the names of a parent, birthplaces, and sometimes they even tell immigration stories in the obituaries. Over here on the left-hand obituary is for my grandfather. It tells me he was born in Austria. It gives his date of birth, and it tells me that he was 18 years old when he came to the country. So I can use that information to calculate his date of arrival. It also gives me the names of his brothers, Victor and Samuel. And that can be important because if you can't find your own ancestor, you can always try to trace a relative on a passenger list. And if you find them, you can look through the other names of your on the passenger list, and you may find your ancestor that way. The other obituary, it's of my great grandmother, and it goes even further and tells me which section of Austria she came from. It tells me again when she was born and how old she was when the United States, and names of relatives as well. There's a lot of places you can try to find newspapers. We have on our state library website, we have an electronic resources page that has newspaper databases on that. State employees can research those databases. They can do it remotely from home. You just have to put in your library card number and your last name. We also have a microfilm collection of newspapers that's very large. We have at least one newspaper from all 67 of the Pennsylvania counties. Our microfilm newspaper also, if you can't come to the state library, it is some of the reels of microfilm are available to be interlibrary loaned. So you may be able to go to your own local library, and if they have a microfilm reader, you can request that the microfilm will be sent to your local library and use it there. Chronicling America is from the Library of Congress. It has historical newspapers from all over the US. They're from 1777 and 1963 in their collection. And the Pennsylvania Newspaper Project, it's from Pennsylvania State University, and they also have a lot of smaller town and college newspapers that you can try to look for articles about your ancestor in there. The Google News Archive and elfine.com, these are internet newspaper archives, and they also have newspapers from all over the world on those sites. Another place to check is county histories and family histories and genealogies. I think my notes here a minute. You can find them at the State Library catalog. We have digitized a lot of them in the PA Photos and Documents section on Power Library. There are also a lot that have been digitized on different databases like Ancestry and Heritage Quest and Family Search. A lot of times in county and family histories, they will tell stories of early settlers to the area, or they'll tell stories of prominent families who are living in the area. And a lot of times in these stories, they include information about the settler or the family member that originally came to the United States, where they came from and when. Family histories quite frequently have a lot of immigration stories in them as well. If you find a family history in our state library catalog, if there's a digital copy available, there should be a link in the catalog record that you can just click on that link, and it'll take you to the site where the family history is, and you can just go directly to it from our catalog. So once you've gone through all of this and looked at all the records that you can find for your ancestor, you want to try to figure out where your ancestor arrived at, because it'll help narrow down your immigration search. There were a lot of different points of entry. There were major ports like New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Boston. There was a major port on the West Coast in San Francisco. That was called Angel Island. It was sort of the West Coast equivalent of Ellis Island. But there were also more minor ports, like Charleston, South Carolina had a port for a while. Galveston, Texas had a port. So there was a lot of different places that your ancestor could come into the United States. It helps to narrow it down if you know which port he came in at. If you don't find him at the port that you're expecting, there were a system of coastal steamers that ran between ports. So if he didn't enter the United States at the most obvious port, he may have taken one of those steamers and gone to the next nearby port and tried to enter there. Sometimes people did do that because if they were refused entry at one port, they could still try to enter somewhere else. So they might have just gone to a different port and tried to enter again at another time. Another thing to take into account is when he arrived. First immigration laws were enacted in 1790, but obviously people were arriving before that. The records that were created to track people's immigration changed as the immigration laws changed. And in the beginning, there wasn't a whole lot of record keeping. So you're not going to find a lot of records from your ancestor's arrival if he arrived very early in time. The first immigration law was enacted in 1790. In 1798, the immigrant arrivals were required to register at a local court, so you may be able to find records there. Passenger lists were not required until 1820. And in 1820, those passenger lists had pretty minimal information on them. It really wasn't until 1892 when the law changed again and they created immigration passenger lists that shipping companies were required to list things like where the person was from, where they were going in the United States, and how much money they brought with them, names of relatives, and things like that. Also, before 1906, when the immigration law changed again, this whole immigration and naturalization process could have occurred anywhere in any court in the United States. In 1906, the law changed and it standardized all of that. It established the Bureau of Immigration and Naturalization. So prior to 1906, you could go to any court of record and file for citizenship there. You're probably going to have to look in places like county archives in their records, or on sites like Family Search or Ancestry. They do have some county naturalization records there. After 1906, after September of 1906, you're going to need to contact the National Archives and look for immigration records. They would have those immigration records. And then the law changed again in 1924. Those records are kept at the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. If you go to the National Archives and the U.S. Citizenships and Immigration Services site, they have pretty detailed information on their websites, not for just about what records they hold, but where to find other records too that they don't hold.
Okay, also I want to put in here before 1790, before the country became the United States, if someone from another country came in through a port, Philadelphia, New York, they had to register as British citizens, so that there are other sets of records that show that someone changed, say, from Italian or another European country to become a British citizen.
Before 1820, like I said, passenger lists were not required. If you came before the Revolutionary War, before 1790, when the first immigration law was enacted, and you were a British subject, your ancestor was a British subject, you would probably not be listed on a passenger list, and you definitely wouldn't be listed on any of the naturalization lists that you can find. They were traveling from one area of Britain to another, and records weren't kept for them because they weren't changing their legal status at all by obtaining citizenship in a new country. The other thing is there's no central depository for passenger lists. Many times they weren't required to even make them. It really depended on what the ship's captain wanted to do and the requirement of the port he was landing at. So many times if they did make them, they did not retain them. They simply destroyed them. The ones you can find available, especially before 1790, you can find in the Pennsylvania Published Archives. This is different than the Pennsylvania State Archives. The Pennsylvania Published Archives is a document that records the transactions of the Pennsylvania government. They did list foreign naturalizations in the Pennsylvania Archives, and you can search that on Ancestry and on the database called Fold 3. Sometimes these passenger lists that survived were published in books and journals, but it was pretty sporadic. There was no central system to make sure that they were all retained. They do have some passenger lists for Philadelphia at the Pennsylvania State Archives too, for before 1820. And there are no passenger lists at the before 1820 at the National Archives. The federal government didn't require people to make passenger lists, so they didn't keep them or retain them there. When you're looking for your ancestor on a passenger list, the first place to probably start if you're looking for early passenger lists before 1820 is in an index. The biggest index is the Passenger and Immigration List Index by William Philby. This is a very large multi-volume set. It is included in the paid subscription to Ancestry, but it is not included in the Ancestry Library Edition. So unfortunately, to search this index, you will either have to go to a library or historical society that has it in their collection, or you're going to have to pay for an Ancestry subscription to use it. There is also something called a bibliography of ships' passenger lists from 1535 to 1825. This book, it lists a lot of the published passenger lists because these passenger lists that were published, they were published very sporadically and they're scattered all over. It also separates the passenger lists that were published by time period, and it can separate them by ethnic groups. So if your ancestor arrived with a large group of Welsh ancestors or from Ireland and you know that, you can look to see which passenger lists were published for those. You can get this book digitally, and Family Search's digital library, I think, is also in Google Books. The good thing about this is if you go through this passenger list and find the passenger list, you can also look in sites like Google Books or in our catalog to see if there's a digital copy available, because many of these published passenger lists are no longer in copyright. So you can find them digitally online then. There are some other indexes available that you can search. Ancestry Library Edition has Philadelphia passenger list and immigration list from 1800 to 1850. And they also have a database called Pennsylvania's Arriving Passenger and Crew List that goes from 1800 to 1962. If you can't find your ancestor on a passenger list, be sure to check the crew list, because many times when people came to the United States, they came as the crew, and they couldn't afford the passage, so they would work as the crew on the ship that they were arriving on. And then when they arrived in the United States, they stayed and entered the United States. And you can also find passenger lists in Family Search, and again on Fold 3 in the Pennsylvania Published Archives. The Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission has the passenger list, but only from the Port of Philadelphia. They have the Port of Philadelphia passenger list from 1727 to 1808. These passenger lists are on reels of microfilm. They're not digital yet. So you'd have to search an index called the Pennsylvania German Pioneers. The Pennsylvania German Pioneers is available digitally. You can go through the state library's catalog to access that. The National Archives will have passenger lists dating after January 1st, 1820. In addition to their passenger lists, they also have something called the Access to Archival Databases. These list primarily Russian, Irish, German, and Italian immigrants. These immigrants came to New York during the 1800s. If your ancestor arrived at the Port of New York, you can search the passenger list for both Ellis Island and Castle Garden. Castle Garden was the immigrant processing center before Ellis Island. It was open between 1855 and 1890. Ellis Island opened in 1892. The 2 years between that, immigrants were processed at the U.S. Barge Office in New York. But the records for those are kept at the Ellis Island and Castle Garden websites. You can search them there, and you can search both the Barge Office and for Ellis Island and Castle Garden at those websites. Ancestry and Family Search both also have the passenger lists for databases for Ellis Island and Castle Garden. In Ancestry, they're combined into one database, so you only have to search one time. If you try to go through Family Search, you'll have to search each site separately for their passenger lists. They also, in Ancestry and Family Search, they have separate databases for other ports. The best thing to do to find these databases is to use their card catalog feature. You can see what they have in Ancestry, what you can search, and you can select, if you want only the Ellis Island database, you can select to search only Ellis Island records, and this will help keep you from turning up a lot of search results that you're not interested in. On the right side here, this is just a sample of a passenger list that you will find. It's supposed to be the passenger list for my grandfather and his brother. It states where they arrived from. They put down Nova Vis, Austria. Now, the thing to remember where people arrived from, when they were asked that question, a lot of times they either gave a very general answer for a very large area, or else they may have sometimes told you told the person the last place that they were living before they came to the port to get on the ship to go. They won't actually give you the birthplace of where they were actually from, where you can find their birth records and things like that. The passenger list also states where they were intending to go in the United States. In this case, it was Mount Carmel, Pennsylvania. It even gives that they were intending to go live with my uncle or their uncle, and it gives the uncle's name on the list, and it actually even tells you how much money they were carrying. I believe it says $5. So this is just an example of what they were asking for on immigration passenger lists after 1892. There's a few other places you can go if you can't find your passenger list in Ancestry or Family Search. There's the Pennsylvania German Pioneers passenger lists, the ships list, ships transcriber guilds. These are not always, they're not as complete as Ancestry or Family Search, but they are always adding records to them. And even Ancestry and Family Search are constantly digitizing new records. So if you don't find your ancestor listed in one of the databases, keep trying, because they're constantly updating as they digitize new things, and you may find him later. Cindy's list is another, it's a genealogy list, and it has a lot of links to different places you can search for immigration records on it.
There's also a lot of information on different, say, Swedish American organizations or Irish American organizations will also have some things on websites that they have culled over the years.
Sometimes you're not going to be able to find your passenger list because, as I said, there's a lot of people with the same names. Record keeping wasn't as accurate back then. You may have to move on to trying to search for naturalization records. A lot of times the date of arrival and the port that they came in on are included in the naturalization records. Naturalization is normally a two-step process. First, your ancestor had to go to the courthouse and file something called a declaration of intent, or the first papers. This is usually where you're going to find the passenger list information. It'll give you the date of arrival and the name of the port, and sometimes the name of the ship. It depends on where they were filing and when. After another, Kathy, did you say something?
No.
Oh, okay, sorry. After another time period has passed, and these time periods are going to vary depending on which immigration laws were in effect at the time. Sometimes it was a couple of years, sometimes it was 5 years or more that they had to wait. They filed for a petition for a naturalization. These are sometimes called second papers or final papers, and this is just the paper completing the naturalization process. The immigration information that you're going to find on these papers depends on what court they were filing in and what time period, which immigration laws were in effect at that time. This is just an example of the naturalization papers for before the immigration laws changed in 1906 and after the immigration laws changed in 1906. Before the immigration laws changed, you're not going to find a whole lot of information about your ancestor's life before he came to the United States on this. Really, only thing that you're going to find is the declaration of intent that has his date of arrival, where he arrived at, sometimes, depending on the time period, the name of the ship. After 1906, you can see they asked many more detailed questions. They asked about where he was born. They asked for names of other family members in addition to just simply their arrival information. To find naturalization records, you first need to find out where and when your ancestor was naturalized. In 1790s, when the first law was passed in 1790, so, and that at that point, any court of record could conduct naturalization proceedings. So your ancestor could have been naturalized in any federal, state, county, or local court. If your ancestor was naturalized during the colonial era, you'll have to go to the Pennsylvania State Archives. The Pennsylvania State Archives has naturalization records for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. If you're looking for pre-revolution naturalization records, they have the naturalization lists of the Supreme Courts and courts of nisi prius from 1740 to 1773. They have digitized these, and you can search them remotely from your computer at home. They're available at the Power Library site at the PA Photos and Documents collection. There are also naturalization lists in the Pennsylvania Published Archives that are on Fold 3 and Ancestry. And there is a document called The Names of Foreigners Who Took the Oath of Allegiance to the Province of the State of Pennsylvania. This is by William Henry Eagle. You can find this in Google Books, and Family Search also has it in their digital library. That has also naturalization lists from colonial times. If you're looking after 1790, you can go to the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. They have the Pennsylvania Supreme Court Naturalization Records from 1793 to 1868. Again, like I stated before, your ancestor could have gone to any court of record to be naturalized. So more than likely he went to a county court because they were the most closest to him, or probably also the cheapest to file for these papers in. So for county court naturalization records, you're going to need to contact the county courthouse where the naturalization occurred. And you can find contact information for the county courthouses on our website. There are also naturalization records at the National Archives. If your ancestor was naturalized in Philadelphia between 1794 and 1904, and again from 1914 to 1930, they did conduct naturalizations in the Philadelphia court, and those records are kept at the Philadelphia City Archives. So if your ancestor was naturalized in Philadelphia, you may want to check with the City Archives first to see if they have the record there. Also, a lot of these county and smaller court naturalization records have been digitized, and you can find them in Ancestry and Family Search. The best way to find them is to go use their card catalog. Again, I believe Family Search calls it their collections list, to narrow your search down to just the county that you're interested in and the naturalization records. If you're looking for a female ancestor or an ancestor that arrived in the United States as a child, women weren't specifically included or excluded from naturalization laws, but the way judges interpreted the immigration laws, they were generally instead granted derivative citizenship, which means if they married a US citizen or if their husband became a US citizen during their marriage, then they were also granted citizenship. So they typically won't have naturalization papers in their own name. It wasn't until 1922 that married women could actually file for citizenship on their own. If your ancestor arrived as a child, they were also granted derivative citizenship. They were considered citizens if their fathers were citizens. So if their father became a citizenship while they were a child, they would also become citizens, and they would not have their own naturalization papers. If their father did not become a citizen, or if he waited until after the child was 21, then that child would have to file for citizenship papers on his own, and he would have them in his own name. If your ancestor arrived as a slave or an indentured servant, they're probably not going to find them anywhere on a regular passenger list. Indentured servants were sometimes listed on regular passenger lists, although a lot of times there was a notation that they were an indentured servant. If you can find them in a passenger list, a lot of times they also listed the name of the person that they were indentured to. There are a few places you can look for records for indentured servants. The Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission has a website discussing the indentured servants records that they have in their collection. If you're lucky enough that your ancestor was from Chester County, Pennsylvania, they have a database for Chester County servant and slavery records in their collection. You have to go to the Chester County Archives to find it. Ancestry also has some indentured servant records for Philadelphia, Pennsylvania from 1771 to 1773. If your ancestor arrived in America as a slave, he's not going to be on a regular passenger list. Passenger lists weren't required when owners could legally bring slaves into the United States. They were sometimes listed on cargo manifests, however. And again, the details that are going to be on these cargo manifests are going to depend on what the ship's captain basically felt like recording. Some of the cargo manifests do give names and ages on them. Some of them simply list the number of persons that they were carrying. The National Archives has a website with information about searching civil records that are relating to American slavery. The cargo manifests are going to be in the records of the US Customs Service. It's record group 36, so you would have to go to the National Archives for those. Ancestry does have some slave manifest databases on it for a few southern states, but there are not very many of them. If you get stuck, one of the first things you want to do is go back and check your indexes and try to find your ancestor listed in index, because that can maybe direct you to where the passenger list that he is on is published. The two big ones again are Pennsylvania, our passenger and immigration lists, and Pennsylvania German pioneers. The other thing to do is trace relatives or neighbors who may have emigrated with your ancestor. A lot of times people traveled in large groups. Either an entire family might emigrate to the United States together. Also, sometimes people went to villages. Some businesses went to villages and offered jobs in the United States. So large groups from people from one village may have emigrated all at one time. If you can trace your relatives and find them on a passenger list, if you look through the other names, you might find your ancestor as well. You also want to try to trace your male ancestors first. Especially with early passenger lists, they just didn't list women and children on them. If anything, they probably would have listed your male's ancestor's name and then put and wife or and family after it. Another thing to do to get around the name problem is to do wildcard searching. Wildcard searching is just using things like an asterisk or a question mark to substitute for certain letters in your last name. If you go to Ancestry Family Search's website, they can usually give you a guide to which symbols you're supposed to use to substitute for what parts of your last name. You also should try every variation of your ancestor's last name that you can think of. And not just his last name, you should also try different variations of first names. For instance, my great-grandfather, when he was in the United States, they referred to him as Mike. A lot of his records are in the name Mike. I think his obituary was published with that. But his actual name was Dimitri, and that was the name that was on his naturalization papers. Also, if you can't find your ancestor anywhere, you might want to look at Canadian border crossing records. Many times it was much cheaper to sail to Canada instead of trying to sail directly from Europe to the United States. So there were quite a few people who sailed to Canada and then crossed into the United States over land when they entered the United States. And you can also check for foreign passenger lists that were created at the point of departure. These were created by shipping line employees, usually for the country where they were departing from. You can find your ancestor there to find out when he departed. You can also calculate how long his trip would have taken, because it did depend on when he traveled. And you can use that to calculate when he arrived in the United States. The downside is those records are going to be in a foreign language, but you can still figure out things like dates and if you can find your name on it. You also might want to look at maps to trace your ancestors' likely path of migration. People who arrived from countries in Southern Europe, they're going to have different points of departure than people who arrived from countries in Northern Europe. Another good thing to do, again, is to go through the Ancestry Card Catalog and the Family Search Collection list, because this will let you focus on searching specific databases and resources or for a specific geographic area. And if you're looking for the card catalog and Ancestry, it's very easy to find. In the black bar at the top, there's a search, the word search. It brings you to a drop-down menu. You can look at all of the databases that Ancestry has in its entire collection. You can separate it by categories such as immigration and travel. You can even narrow it down further than that by searching for only passenger lists if you want. You can also have the option to search for databases for a different geographic area. You can see here that I just selected the databases for that are related to the country of Italy. These are just some more online resources you can go to find out more information about immigration resources. Family Search and Family Search wikis, they have a lot of information, not just about immigration, but all areas of genealogy. The same with Cindy's List. The National Archives, the Library of Congress, Ships List, and Immigrant Ancestors Projects. Those are good places to look for passenger lists as well. Library of Congress has historical maps. So if you want to look at a map of the country where your ancestor came from during the time period that when he lived there, that can be good because that can give you a clue as to which path he would have taken, which port he would have headed for to depart for the United States. This is just a few more books about immigration, searching for immigration records and naturalization records and passenger lists. They came in ships. It has a very good overview of the whole process of immigration and naturalization that your ancestor probably went through. It also has several bibliographies in it that will give you guides to more print resources that are available to search for your ancestor. Oops, and I am sorry. This is our contact information also. That was pretty much my entire what I could think of for immigration resources for you. There is a link here to our state library catalog at the state library website, and a direct link to our electronic resources page. For state employees to research our electronic resources, you have to have a library card. If you don't have one yet, I have a link to the library card application at the bottom of the page there. And also our email address is here. If you have any questions about immigration or any other genealogy question or any question in general, you can always email us at the state library and we'll try to answer it for you. Kathy, did you have anything you wanted to add?
The state employee library card applications, you will not get a physical card because the state library staff is teleworking. So you will get an email from a staff member with an account number, and that will allow you to access the electronic resources that Amy has told you about today.
There were some
questions?
Yeah, there were some questions here in the chat, Amy, so I can I can ask those for you. Okay, so the first one is, how can I find out which Nazi labor camp my family members were sent to? How can I find out if a family member was one of the Ritchie Boys, the secret U.S. World War II intelligence unit?
Okay, you also sent that question to our reference email. I have forwarded that to Amy, and she will take some time outside of this to answer. The best place to go for those kinds of records is the Holocaust Museum Library in Washington, D.C., but there are also other Holocaust centers throughout the country.
Great.
But wait to hear from Amy.
Yep. Okay, here's another one. How do you use immigration records, such as Ellis Island, with the changing of names, especially Slavic type names, Poluska versus Census Polinka?
Well, that's where the wildcard searching comes in. You can use like an asterisk or a question mark, and you can replace whole sections of your last name. I think it's usually up to 5 characters. And so that will help with that. The Ellis Island search screen also has, if you go through and look at all the questions, instead of just typing it into the search box that's there, there's a button you can click on to get all the questions on one page. They also have a way that you can search for names that sound like yours, or search for alternate spellings and things like that. It depends on what you select when you go into that advanced search box on the Ellis Island search page.
Is there a way to find older medical records when an ancestor was hospitalized?
There are some medical records for state hospitals. There's 2 systems of state hospitals. There was one for, obviously, for mental health care, and there were also state hospitals in like the coal regions were medical hospitals. Some of those are in the state archives. I'm sorry, not the National Archives. You could try there. Many times they didn't because of privacy reasons, so you may not be able to find many detailed information, except maybe they were on an admissions list or something like that.
Can you obtain a state library card if you're a retired state employee?
State library cards are available to any Pennsylvanian over the age of 16, but you must be an active state employee in order to have the access remotely to the electronic resources we have.
Will Ancestry access be extended again past the June date?
We don't know that. We can ask that question, watch for the employee bulletin board, because if they do extend it beyond the June 30th date, we have always put the announcement there in the employee bulletin board.
How would you suggest researching ancestry in foreign countries, Italy specifically?
If you go through the card catalog, when you click on the card catalog, there is a big map shows up. And there's an option to just go into, you can click on whichever country, or you can do states as well. But if you're looking for a foreign country, like I had the picture of the Italy databases on there. If you click on that, it'll show you which databases that Ancestry has available for that country. So you can go through and choose which database is most likely to have the records that you're interested in on it. They'll have a little description of what records are included in which database when you click on it, so you can see what you're interested in.
And some countries are going to have sites on their national websites for people who are looking for genealogical records, but you have to remember that they're going to be in the language of that particular country.
Thank you both. That was all of the questions that was in the chat. I can answer the last. Will you be sharing this presentation with us? Yes, it will go out to you via an email, I believe, the slides. And you can also watch a video from our website. So give it a week or so and it should be up under the Lunch and Learn section on the State Library website. That was all the questions.